Hello everyone, this is Rig, and today we are going to start a new playlist by the name Indian Political History. This is episode 1. So, even though this playlist is about political history, today we cannot directly start with the political history of ancient India. At first, we will have to go through the sources, and the first and most important source of Indian political history or Indian history in general is the Vedas. There are four types of Vedas: the RigVeda, SamaVeda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. So, we will discuss how Vedas contribute to the historicity of India, even though they are not exactly truth, but still we can extract the history from them. How do we extract the information? What are the dates of the Vedas? Those are the things we will go through in this video. So our topic is literary source beginning with the Vedas. Sources of ancient Indian history. So how do Vedas function as a source of ancient Indian history, and what are the other sources of ancient history in India? So in this presentation, we will study about the nature of history. History is a reconstruction of past based on available records like chronicles, memoirs, and inscriptions. For ancient India, such direct materials are limited. So, what are the main sources of history in the Indian subcontinent? Chronicles, memoirs, and inscriptions. Even though none of these are direct sources of history, but still, since they have a lot of historicity in them, we can extract the needed information from these sources. To study Indian history, scholars rely on literary sources, archaeological remains, inscriptions, coins, and monuments, which together provide a complete picture. So, these are the things from where we can reconstruct the complete history of ancient India. Even though complete history is also very fragile, considering that there was no direct history writing in Indian subcontinent. There were story writings, there were religious writings, and from there we will have to extract the informations which are valid as history. The presentation will first study the Vedas, the earliest Indo-European literary records including Saṁhitās, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. So slowly in our next videos we are going to read every literary source of ancient Indian history one by one. We will examine debates from Colebrooke, Burnouf, Max Müller, Winternitz, Tilak, Jacobi, P.V. Kane, and Bühler regarding the chronology of Vedic texts ranging from 4000 BC to 500 BC. So these are the famous interpreters of ancient Indian history, and we are going to go through the debates which occurred in between them, and we are also going to see all of their opinions regarding these sources and how the sources should be interpreted. Importance of the Vedas as source for religion, philosophy, society, law, astronomy, and music will be discussed along with their role in political history. So, how are Vedas important not only as a source of history, but how do they contribute to the religion? How do they contribute to philosophy? What is the view of the Vedas in the society, about the society, and how are the laws mentioned in Vedas, what are the astronomical facts we get from Vedas, and even the musical tunes will be discussed in respect or in context with the Vedas, and how was their role in the political historiography of ancient India. The oral transmission of Vedic texts by Brahmanas, ascent sensibility sensitivity, and grammatical traditions ensured their incorruptibility. So, how Vedas remained exact even though it was orally transmitted throughout ages. that will be studied in detail. The relation of Vedic texts with Indus Valley civilization, epic age, linguistic studies, and their continuing historical significance will also be analyzed. So, all of these relationships will be studied in context to the Vedas. Literary sources, Vedas. So, how Vedas act as the most important literary source of ancient India. Earliest records. The Vedas are the earliest literary records of Indo-Europeans known as Aryans and represent the earliest literary efforts of man. So, in Veda, according to Vedas, the historians interpret that we are the people who settled in the Indian subcontinent are Aryans who are to be said to be Indo-Europeans. But this view has been contradicted according to modern historiography, where DNA evidence and other forms of genealogical studies refute this theory. But still, according to Vedas, it is the earliest literary record of the Indian subcontinent. The term Vedas covers a vast literature divided into four heads: Rig, Arke, Shaman, Sāman, Yajus, and Atharvan. So these are the four types of Vedas: RigVeda, SamaVeda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. These are further classified into Saṁhitās or mantras, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. So these are the other texts like mantras, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads, which are based on the Vedas. Vedic hymns are composed over a long span by many authors from the earliest hymns of Rig Samhita to the earliest Upanishads. So Vedic hymns are composed not on a particular time period. They have been evolved and composed throughout a long period of time. Many people have contributed to extend the Vedas and to add to the philosophy of the Vedas. So all these together combine to form the Samhita, and the latest versions or the latest interpretations or extensions of the Vedas are the Upanishads. The first European scholar to write on Vedas was Colebrooke, Asiatic Researches on 1805. So he was the first European scholar who studied the Vedas, and his articles have been published in Asiatic Researches in 1805. Later, Burnouf and his pupil Max Müller shaped Vedic studies in Europe. So these were the two important people who spread the Vedic teachings or the concept of the Vedas in the Western world. In the fourth volume of Vedas, Max Muller dated the Upanishads, Brahmanas, and Saṁhitās backward from Buddha, assigning about 200 years to each. So he dated the Vedas by taking the time of Buddha as the end point, and then he went backwards from the time of Buddha, and he said that each Veda took 200 years to compose. So with this method, if we backdate, then the earliest Vedas were composed in around 1200 BC, and that was Max Muller's view. Muller himself admitted the dates were minimum estimates, purely a surmise, and considered 1200 BC only as a terminus, a quo. So this date Muller himself has said that may not be exact. So that is about an introduction to the Vedas. Dating the Vedas, scholarly debates. So, how Vedas have been dated and what are the opinions of different scholars in this context? So, Max Muller admitted no power on earth could decide whether Vedic hymns were composed in 1000, 1500, 2000, or 3000 BC. So, Max Muller has clearly said this, that there is no power on earth which can assign a specific date to the Vedas. So the date of composition of Vedas is a mystery and is totally uncertain according to Max Müller. Professor M. Winternitz observed that Müller's arbitrary dates gradually gained undue authority, quoted as scientific fact without new evidence. So, this was a criticism of Müller's view by Professor Winternitz, who said that Müller could not assign any specific date to Vedas because he was devoid of any kind of scientific fact. So he did not go through the evidence properly. That is why date couldn't be assigned to the Vedas according to Max Muller. So it became common for scholars to repeat 1200 to 1000 BC as the date of RigVeda, though unsupported by proof. So according to the estimate given by Max Muller, it became a common fact to assign the date of 1200 to 1000 BC as the date of composition of RigVeda, but it was totally based on the opinion of Max Muller and does not have any particular or specific proof to support this evidence. A. Jacobi attempted to place the Vedic literature in 3rd millennium BC using astronomical calculations. Western scholars reacted strongly, calling it exaggerated. So, H. Jacobi is a person who went through the astronomical evidences written in the Vedas. He went through the constellations and position of stars and different planets as has been described in the Vedas, and backdating all those evidences, he assumed that the Rig Veda could be dated in about 3rd millennium BC, and that was totally based on the astronomical calculations going backdate. But Western scholars did not at all accept this and totally termed it to be an exaggerated estimation. Tilak independently studied astronomical references in the Vedas and dated them around 4000 BC. So, according to the astronomical references given in the Vedas, Bal Gangadhar Tilak or Lokamanya Tilak estimated that the date of the Vedas can be approximately 4000 BC, and that was almost similar to Jacobi's view, but the Western scholars have severely criticized his theory. Some conclusions of Jacobi and Tilak were later proved wrong, yet their attempts highlighted the difficulties of fixing Vedic chronology. So, some of their thoughts have been proved to be wrong in later times because of updated scientific research, but it proves that it is very difficult to date the Vedas. Modern estimates of Vedic period. So, what does modern evidence suggest about the Vedic period, about the dates of the Vedic period? So, Winternitz dating. After detailed analysis, Professor Winternitz concluded the Vedas were composed between 2500 to 500 BC. Earlier, he had stated that Vedic literature may reach into 3rd millennium. So, after detailed analysis, Professor Winternitz concluded that Vedas must have been composed in between 2500 to 500 BC. So it took approximately 2000 years to compose the Vedas as we see it today. So he stated that Vedic literature, sometimes he has also said that the earliest date of composition may reach up to 3rd millennium BC or 3000 BC. Rejection of 1200 BC. He criticized Müller's 1200 to 1500 BC estimate as inconsistent with the present state of India's political, literary, and religious history. So, according to Winternitz, Müller was incorrect, and he has said that 2500 to 500 BC was the date of composition of the Vedas. Bühler supported this conclusion, arguing convincingly that Müller's dates were no longer valid. So, another famous interpreter of Indian history, Bühler, also supported the dates given by Winternitz, which said that 2500 to 500 BC is the actual date of composition of the Vedas. P.V. Kane's view. Dr. P.V. Kane placed the period of the Samhita, Brahmana, and Upanishad between 4000 to 1000 BC. So, P.V. Kane is another historian who, according to his research, placed the date of Samhita, Brahmana, and Upanishad in between 4000 to 1000 BC. So, he goes a bit more into the past as the date of composition of the Vedas. Hymns of Tattariya Samhita and Brahmanas may be earlier than 4000 BC. So, some of the hymns, as stated in Tattariya Samhita and different Brahmanas, may date back to 4000 BC according to the astronomical references given, while some Upanishads, including the earliest, are unlikely to be later than 1000 BC. So some Upanishads may be later than 1000 BC. So all of these Vedas and texts related to the Vedas took a long period to compose. The dates may vary in between the range of 2000 to 3000 years. Despite differences, modern research accepts a broad range. So, a scholarly consensus was reached in which there is a broad range given to the composition of Vedas. From pre 4000 BC, some for some hymns to 500 BC for later composition. So, it took roughly 3500 years to compose the entirety of the Vedas, which is very much interesting considering that India is the oldest surviving ancient civilization in today's world. Archaeological and linguistic approaches. So, what are the archaeological and linguistic things we can know from the Vedas? What are the evidences which support archaeological and linguistic estimates? Archaeological discoveries. New archaeological discoveries introduce fresh debates in the Vedic chronology, complicating the determination of dates. So now the Vedic age has been supported with materialistic evidences. And when these materialistic evidences are taken into context, then we get fresh ideas regarding the time of the Vedas. Attempts were made to date the Vedas by comparing the Vedic language with other Indo-European languages. So dates of the Vedas were made or were were investigated by comparing the languages with of the Vedas with other Indo-European languages. So comparative analysis helped to fix the date of the Vedas. Professor Winternitz highlighted the linguistic similarities between Vedic and Avesta and between Vedic and classical Sanskrit yielded no positive result. However, this form of comparative linguistic analysis was totally criticized by Professor Winternitz, who said that trying to derive similarities between Vedic texts and Zendavesta provide no conclusion about the dates of the Vedas. P.V. Kane observed that comparative linguistics had progress, but conclusions were largely conjectural and no proof. So, P.V. Kane has also said that even though linguistic study helps in getting some idea, but it cannot be concluded, it cannot be a conclusive evidence regarding the date of the Vedas. The discovery of Indus Valley civilization posed a question of whether the Vedic age preceded or followed it. So when Indus Valley civilization was discovered with large amount of materialistic evidences, then there came a debate of whether the Vedic age was before Indus Valley civilization or after Indus Valley civilization. Some scholars argue the Indus Valley civilization was destroyed by invading Aryans, making Harappa and Mohenjo-daro the earliest possible dates for Vedas. So foreign archaeologists like Cunningham and others, they have tried to go into the conclusion that the Indus Valley civilization was destroyed by the Aryans who invaded India. But modern research states that nothing such happened. Later evidence challenged this destruction theory, showing disagreements among archaeologists. So later, when genealogical studies with DNA evidences came into historical research, then this theory of invading Aryans destroying Harappa Mohenjo-daro was totally refuted. Historical value of the Vedas. So how are the Vedas important in the context of history? Cultural importance. The Vedas are invaluable as sources of for religion, philosophy, society, literature, law, astronomy, and music. So the Vedas do not only tell about religion. Many people have this concept that anything written in Sanskrit means something related to ancient Indian religion. No, it was written in Sanskrit, but the topics varied in range. The topic could be about religion, it could be about philosophy, society, literature, law, astronomy, and even music. So, if the medium of expression was Sanskrit, it was not that everything written in the Vedas or ancient texts had to be about religion. No, it was not the fact. Hindus hold the Vedas with deep reverence, which may be exaggerated but not undeserved. So, even though many things in the Vedas may be out of context or may seem like an exaggeration, but still Hindus to the followers of ancient Indian religion, Vedas have deep symbolic respect among the Indians. It is a great cultural asset for the Indians. For political history, Vedas provide incorruptible texts preserved exactly as recited several thousand years ago. So this is one of the unique feature of the Vedas because all the texts have been preserved as it is. There has been no corruption or deterioration in the form of expression or the evidences presented. So it has been recited exactly as it was recited thousands of years ago. So today the Vedas Hindus study in India are the same things that the people of India studied some 3000 or 4000 years ago, or maybe more earlier. Learned Brahmins memorized the Vedas, ensuring perfect pronunciation and transmission. So, how were the Vedas transmitted? The Brahmins memorized the Vedas and told it to the future generation. They again memorized it, and thus, generation wise, it was transmitted from one generation to another. The text remained uncorrupted. Vedic Sanskrit differed from later Sanskrit. Accent changes altered meanings, such as Indra Shatru, meaning either Indra kill my enemy or Indra is my enemy. So there is a confusion regarding the Vedic Sanskrit meaning and the interpretation of that meaning according to later Sanskrit linguistic forms. So there are confusions, but more or less the text has remained the same. Patanjali's Mahabhashya shows how accent and grammar preserved Vedic meaning. So, Mahabhashya, according to Patanjali, shows how the grammar preserved in the Vedic texts are still evidence enough to prove that there has been almost no distortions. So Patanjali is a grammarian in ancient Sanskrit language, and he has proved that Vedas have not been distorted. This accurate oral tradition makes the Vedas uniquely reliable for understanding ancient India. So this accurate oral tradition, because it has been preserved exactly, it provides a lot of information about ancient India. Reliability of the Vedic texts. How are the Vedic texts reliable for the as a source material of ancient Indian history? Purity of the text. The Vedic texts have been preserved in their purity, unlike many other ancient literatures which suffered corruption. So Vedic texts have been preserved as it is, but many other ancient literatures have suffered a lot of corruption and distortions. So thus Vedic texts have remained pure and almost untouched. They serve as records of events, though incidental details were not intended as history. Vedas were not written as historical documentaries, but the facts written in the Vedas, the stories presented in the Vedas, provide a vital source as the documentaries of ancient India, mainly in political historiography. Where incidents are referred, they are based on reliable traditions, making them fairly correct. So, when incidents are referred in the Vedas, they are more or less reliable, considering the fact that Vedas have been transmitted generation wise without any distortions. Vedic texts provide glimpses of rulers, wars, and social order useful for reconstructing ancient history. So, Vedic texts provide glimpses of rulers, who were the rulers, what was their culture, what were the wars fought by the rulers, how was the society divided, what was the purpose of different people in the society. Everything we can know from the incidents which have been mentioned in the Vedas. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad mentions King Ajatasattu of Kashi, providing historical linkage. So thus many important kings have been discussed in the different Vedic texts. Ajatasattu of Kashi was often confused with Ajatasattu of Magadh. Devaki-putra Krishna was identified with references in Chandogya Upanishad. So many famous characters of history and religion have been discussed in many Vedic texts. Even though many have not been discussed in the four Vedas, but still extensions of Vedas like Upanishads, Brahmanas, Aranyakas provide a lot of information about the different historical dynasties who ruled over India. Scholars like H.C. Roychodhary rejected identifications of Krishna in Upanishads, considering them untenable. So there has been debates between scholars, and these debates are still now going on regarding how reliable Vedas are, or how reliable the Vedic texts are. But still it can be no way denied that Vedas were important source of ancient political history in India. Vedas in historical reconstruction. So, how does Veda act as a source material for reconstructing ancient Indian history? Uncertain chronology. Despite debates, the exact chronology of the Vedas remain unresolved, with dates ranging from pre 4000 BC to 500 BC. In the first portion of this presentation, we have discussed the debates regarding the chronology of the Vedas. Subdivision of ages. Scholars often divide early Indian literature into Vedic age and epic age. So the early Indian literature have been divided into two broader groups. The earliest age consists of the Vedic texts, and the later literature of ancient India consists of the two epics and their extensions, namely Mahabharata and Ramayana. Max Müller and others maintain that the entire Vedic literature was pre-Buddhistic before 500 BC. So the time period of Buddhism emergence is around 5th and 4th century BC. So Max Müller and all other scholars have confirmed this, that even though we cannot be certain about the exact date of Vedas, but we can certainly be sure that it was before the time of Lord Buddha. Use in political history. The Vedas, though not intended as political records, provide indirect evidence for kings, states, and conflicts. Indo-European and Indo-Iranian linguistic comparisons have been attempted but remain inconclusive. So linguistic comparisons have been used in order to estimate the chronology of the Vedas, but they remain highly inconclusive. The relation of Vedic literature with Indus civilization remains debated, whether the Vedic preceded or followed it. So when Indus Valley civilization was discovered, there is a confusion. There still is this confusion whether the Vedic age was before Indus Valley civilization or after Indus Valley civilization. Despite uncertainties, the Vedas remain the most important literary source for early Indian history. So there has been several criticisms, but considering the impact of the Vedas in ancient India, it is to be considered that Vedas were definitely important source for ancient Indian political history. Now we will go through the sources which I have used to discuss all the opinions in this presentation. You can go through these sources for more information. Also, you can use these sources to verify the information which I have provided. A History of Indian Literature by Winternitz, widely cited for dating Vedic texts between 2500 to 500 BC and evaluating their historical value. Colebrooke, Asiatic Researchers 1805, the first European scholar to write on the Vedas, laying the groundwork for future studies. Max Müller, Introductions to Vedas and Gifford Lectures 1899, dated the Vedas around 1200 BC as a terminus a quo, though admitted it was arbitrary. Burnouf, French scholar who advanced the Vedic studies in Europe, teacher of Max Müller. Jacobi, used astronomical calculations to push Vedic chronology back to 3rd millennium BC. Lokamanya Tilak worked on astronomical observations in the Vedas, dating them to around 4000 BC. Bühler rejected Müller's 1200 BC dating, while Kane placed Vedic texts between 4000 to 1000 BC. H.C. Roychaudhuri critiqued identifications of Krishna in Upanishadic texts, stressing reliability of historical traditions. So that was all about how Vedas are important as a source material to know about the political history of India. In the first few episodes, we are going to go through the sources of political history. We are going to discuss both literary sources and archaeological sources as much as possible. And then we are going to dive deep into the political historiography of ancient Indian subcontinent. So thank you for your patience. Please stay tuned for more interesting content. And with your support and blessings, I hope to bring brighter contents in future. Thank you once again.